everybody, my name is Saloni Doshi. I'm the CEO and Chief Sustainability Officer at Eco Enclosed. Today we're here to talk about void fill and how you would select the best void fill for your particular needs. But first, what is void fill? Basically, when you're packaging something, particularly when you're putting it into a box, you often need some other addition that's either going to protect your item. Let's say you've got glass that you're shipping and you want to make sure that it doesn't break, of course, in transit. So that would be product protection. Alternatively, if you were shipping something in a larger box and had something smaller and you put it in, you have space that you need to fill. That's called dunnage or void fill. The other thing that you might need is if you're shipping something that's not fragile, but you don't want, let's say you have a book, you don't want the edges to get scuffed or like corners to get bent when you're shipping it, you would need some void fill to protect it there. And then another reason might just be that you want beautiful presentation. A lot of those beautiful unboxing videos will have layers of tissue or packaging paper that just enhance the unpackaging experience. So those are all examples of void fill. And we're going to talk about today, what are the different use cases you might have? What are some traditional options that people have been using for the last decade? And then what are some of the new, more eco-friendly alternatives you might turn to? So first we'll talk about individual product protection. If you're packaging something that's fragile, let's say a glass bottle or pottery, or anything that could break in transit, you really want to make sure that you're giving it cushioning so that when it bounces around in transit, it doesn't hit anything and break. So the most sort of traditional way to do individual product protection is bubble wrap. A lot of times you'll see that brands will sort of wrap up their items and just like shove it into a box, and that's going to protect that bottle, but it's not the best unboxing experience. For many of us, it doesn't meet our eco standards. I know probably the kids love it because they get to pop it, but that's about all it has going for it. So today we'll talk a little bit about some of your alternatives, and I'm going to highlight two in particular that I love. And before I talk about those alternatives, I'll first talk about the importance of right sizing. So you can see that box that I was showing you before. This is actually a package I got. I didn't get this glass bottle, but I got a glass bottle in that box with all that bubble wrap. And you just think like, this is way too big. And because it's so big, you need to use more and more bubble wrap to fill it up. And so the first thing I'd recommend is to try to right size your box as much as possible. This one is sort of perfectly right sized for our application today. And so there's a couple options you have. One that I love is FlexiHex, and it's perfect when you're almost always shipping out a couple of the same items because they're pre-sized, and so it needs to work for your particular items. So if you're somebody who shipped out, let's say, a lot of glass bottles of the same size, or let's say you shipped out a lot of essential oils or a lot of candles, we might have a size that fits. And you basically just open it up, and when you open it, it sort of splits in two, and you wrap that up around, and then you just place it right into your box. And so you've got a really great, operationally very easy way to protect that glass bottle in transit. So that's one approach. Now what's cool about this is it's 70% recycled and it's curbside recyclable. So that's one approach. Another approach is green wrap. And so green wrap, if you have sort of lower volumes and you buy by the case, comes in a case like this. When it comes out of the case, if you don't use any tension, this is white on white, it comes in white on white and brown on white. So if it doesn't have any tension, it comes out like just a die cut paper, and you might be like, what is this? What do I do with this? What happens as you take it out of this dispenser is that it starts to expand. And that expansion and that honeycomb layer gives you cushioning that really helps protect your product. So here I have green wrap that's already been expanded, and you just wrap up your item like that, and then put it in your box like this. I think that green wrap works really well when you've got a bunch of different size items. So there's no FlexiHex size that's going to work for you, because you basically just set your dispenser down and you wrap up all your items. Let's say all of your pottery or all of your fragile jewelry or something. You just wrap them up individually, and it doesn't matter what size they are because that green wrap will work really well. Green wrap is unfortunately today virgin. Right now, when they've tested recycled content, that recycled content didn't have the tensile strength that was needed to have this expansion happen. We're working on alternatives, but it is certified as sustainably sourced, and we're working to do more to make it even more sustainable. It's also curbside recyclable. So next we're going to talk about dunnage, and dunnage is basically when you've got a smaller product than your box, you got a bunch of air, and you need to fill that air because otherwise the product's gonna just move around in transit, it's probably going to break or something's going to happen, it's going to get scuffed up. So it's really important that Dunnage is basically blocking and bracing that product into place in your box. So it is actually one of the most common reasons why people send you these pillows. You know, you'll get something from Amazon and they'll have a big box, they'll put everything that they can in it, and then they'll have this automated machine that shoots out all of these pillows, air pillows, that like fill up all that empty space to avoid the movement and does that blocking and bracing. I think many of us don't love the air pillows. I think for number one, it encourages us to ship air. And you don't want to ship air. And it's also, you know, like you're basically shipping air that's basically just plastic pillows that are made with virgin material and more difficult to recycle. So today we'll talk about paper-based alternatives. I think the most popular one that you see fairly commonly is packaging paper. So packaging paper will typically come in a roll like this. They make dispensers for it where you can basically load your roll on the dispenser, pull out the amount you want, and rip it off. It's really versatile, and that's why we love it as a product. Not all packaging paper is recycled, but ours is 100% recycled, and it's manufactured and slitted here in the USA. So we love that about the product. And it comes in a lot of different options. So the way that it works is you basically like rip off your paper. You might put your product in, and then you're just like filling up all the empty space around it. So that's how it works. You've probably seen your own packages have it before. As you're thinking about packaging paper, you want to just think about your options. We have 30 pound, 40 pound, 50 pound, which is our bogus wrap, a 60 pound craft, and then we also have indented craft paper. And all of those different options are just thicker. And so like a really thin paper will crumple into a really small amount. And then as you get thicker and thicker, this is 60 pounds, when you crumple it up, it fills up more space. And so if you find yourself in situations where you have a lot of space, maybe you have a really weirdly shaped items that you're shipping and you have a lot of space, you might be thinking about the 60 pound. If you have smaller places to fill or like things that could be more likely to sort of scuff up, you might want to stick with that 30 pound paper. And then we also have a really cool wheat straw paper, which 20% of that product is made from wheat straw agricultural waste. And that for Eco Enclosed was our first foray into next gen paper. And we think next gen paper is a really great alternative to virgin paper. If and when virgin paper is needed, the more we can use agricultural waste as your supply instead of trees, the better. Another product that we offer that I think is a really cool void fill opportunity is this corrugated bubble. So corrugated bubble is actually made from the scraps that we produce. So when we cut all these boxes, we ended up with a bunch of corrugated scraps. And so then we cut those scraps to the sizes that you need and we'll shred it. And there's a lot of different ways to use corrugated bubble, but the best way is, like, let's say you have a space in your box, you just open it up and you go like that and you just put it into that space in your box, and that will make sure that your product doesn't move at all. So I love it. It's upcycled, it's recycled, and it's recyclable, and I think it's super fun to play with. All right, next we'll talk about what I like to call nesting, but it's basically a little bit like blocking bracing, but it's about holding your product in place. And sort of when you open the product, when your customer opens the package, your product is sort of exactly where you want them to see it, and it's sort of it stays exactly where you put it. So some options that people oftentimes use, sometimes they'll use peanuts, like styrofoam peanuts. I don't have any here. Sometimes they'll use more like styrofoam cutouts that are sort of specifically molded to hold their product in place. This is something that's really common with like appliances and electronics. A lot of times you'll see like basically shred. Like this. I find shred, we don't offer shred, and the main reason is that I find it to be sort of annoying for your customers. It gets everywhere. Additionally, really thin, small strips of corrugated shred are not recyclable. And so what happens is that they're so small, they'll pass through the sorting facilities at your MRF, and then they gum everything up because they're sort of separate items. So when you shred paper even, a lot of your MRFs won't accept it. So you would have to actually compost it instead, but a lot of customers don't know that. So it ends up it ends up getting recycled and actually has sort of a negative impact on the recycling chain. So those are some common options. So here's some options that we might recommend that you replace them with. One is ornament shred. It's basically just shredded, indented craft. It comes in like a large box and you just tear off what you need. But it gives you a lot of the same impact and effect as your shred, but because it's all one piece, it like lays really nicely into your box to have your product be put on top. And then when they pull it out, it is a curbside recyclable thing because again, it's all one paper that has been just shredded. Another option that we might give people is to use tissue paper. So if what you're sending isn't fragile, we've seen a lot of like jewelry companies send their items like this with a really nice layer of tissue paper. They'll put their jewelry on, maybe put another layer of tissue paper on top, and it looks beautiful. Tissue paper is technically recyclable. You'll find though that some MRFs, if a MRF has a local composter that would love the tissue, they actually will say, don't recycle that tissue paper, have you compost it instead. So it's a technically recyclable product. It doesn't necessarily add contamination to the recycling stream, but there are some MRFs that will ask you to compost it instead. I had talked about corrugated bubble in the last section, so you can use it, especially if you've got like a larger thing, you can use it in that same way, just sort of creating a nest that you put down that you can lay your product on top of. And this is 1/2 inch, but if you were to use it that way, you might use a 1/4 inch, a thinner shred, corrugated bubble, to create that. Another product that we have, it's not on our site, but if you were interested in it, you could email us at hello@ecoandclothes.com, and we'd love to give you some quotes. But it's similar to shred, but it all stays together. So it's called Spiral Pack. It comes in this spiral, and you just, like your team would just like pull a little bit of it apart, go like this, and then it creates like a nice nest. But again, because it's all clipped together as one item, it travels properly through the recycling stream, and it does become curbside recyclable. So those are the different options for like creating a nest that we think will hold your product in place, brace it, and create a nice sort of unboxing experience where you don't have to use styrofoam, you don't have to use peanuts, and you don't have to use that shred that's a little bit confusing for your customers and not great for the recycling chain. All right, now we'll talk about edge and scuff protection. So let's say you're shipping out a book like this. You want to make sure that all of the sides of it really arrive intact. I will say that when I shop at used bookstores, what I love is that they send me stuff without sort of care about edge protection. They'll send it to a poly mailer, which is great to see, and hopefully 100% recycled. But if you're shipping a new book, maybe a book that you wrote and published, you really want to make sure it gets there looking beautiful. And so we have a couple options for you. One, and this is, I think, a really cool option, especially if you have like nice hardcover, would be to put a corrugated pad on both sides, the top and the bottom, and then to basically turn pads into edge protectors. So you basically get them perfectly cut to your size, and then you can put them in the box with the pad at the bottom, the edge protector around the side, and then a pad at the top. It's a little bit more potentially like time consuming to fulfill, but it does really protect those edges. Some people might not worry as much about that, but I think it's really helpful. Another way would just be maybe you're not as concerned about edges, but you want to make sure it doesn't get scuffed, would be to just wrap it in tissue paper. And that'll just make sure that that book, like, a lot of corrugate might have little fibers on it. It'll make sure that none of those fibers get onto your book. I think something like that is really important if you're doing like photo books or something. You want to make sure that there's no dust or anything like that on top. And then another option, if it's sized well, is to use one of our inner packaging. We've got these, they're lightly calendared, so they don't have any fibers that come off of it. Craft packaging. We also have these in glassine, which is super calendared and even smoother, but you can just sort of slide the book right in there, or whatever you're packaging, and that just gives it some nice inner packaging that could go then into either a mailer or into a box. So there's a variety of different ways that you can take a product that might not be fragile. You might not need any sort of blocking or bracing, but you do want to give it just a light level of dust protection or edge protection. And we've got a number of different options like these for you. Okay, so the last reason to potentially use some void fill or inner packaging protection would be, frankly, for no potential protection at all, but simply because you want to deliver a great unboxing experience. And so I would say my favorite tool for that is tissue paper. So if you had something really beautiful that you wanted to make sure that your customer was wowed by, just wrapping it in a layer of tissue paper using this sticker is a great way to just enhance that experience. Thankfully, our tissue is 100% recycled. Our stickers are 100% recycled, so you can do that and still feel good about what you're sending. If it's not something like this, but maybe it's something, I talked earlier about nesting. Sometimes you don't really need this nesting idea for like protection or for bracing, but perhaps you just want to give it like a great gift-like experience. A lot of those nesting ideas, the ornament shred and using tissue in this way, aren't necessarily for protection or for nesting, but are really just for presentation. So there are great solutions there as well. And then, one thing, it really only works if you're a much larger brand, but is this idea of molded pulp. And so if you were shipping something and you wanted to make sure that it presented beautifully every single time, you could work with us to create a custom mold for 100% recycled molded pulp. And this way, every time you shipped an order, it would look perfect. You know, it would sort of open more like a retail experience. It works really well, again, if you're larger volumes, let's say 5,000, 10,000 a month at least, that would be an interesting order volume for you to be thinking about molded pulp. And the other thing to think about is making sure that your orders are pretty consistent. Like if you're always shipping out 4 bottles at a time or 2 bottles at a time because you have to make a mold that costs several $1,000s, you want to make sure that mold is going to work for the vast majority of your products. But if that's the case, it's a great solution, and you should reach out to us, and we'd love to talk more about that. So that is it all for void fill, protective packaging and cushioning and all the inner packaging stuff that you might need, particularly if you're shipping in boxes. Hopefully that's a good start for you, but if you ever have any questions or you're sort of exploring our site, first, I always encourage you to get free samples. So if you're ordering sample boxes at all, I think it's a great step to go to our free sample page and order free samples of as many different void fill options as you possibly can, so you can test them together. And then of course, always reach out to us. We love chatting. We love learning about what you're selling and what you're shipping and how we can help you do that more sustainably and more effectively. Just reach out to us at hello@ecoenclosed.com. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.